So to clarify, I don't put the stone in there. I assume the super duper good guy who made it before. So I wouldn't expect that it was so much garbage work. On today's episode of Ranching, we have a 61. What we do on this episode is we make him ready for a government inspection. In Austria we have every 12 months a car inspection if the car is roadworthy, and this car has some things to do. Here, Bondo at its best. We have to weld the rear quarter panel. As you see on this panel, somebody did artwork of Bondo, and what I see here, some glued in sheet metal. But now we will do it the right way, at least for the government inspection. It is not a restoration, it is just weld in a quarter panel, and stay tuned. The first thing we do, we get rid of the mud flap, and then we mark where we cut, cover the edge of the rear bumper so we don't burn it, and the most important thing when you weld on a car is de-attach the battery so you don't fry the generator or the voltage regulator. So something to protect the bumper, our rag will do it, just to don't mess up the rubber. It's important to disconnect the batteries because of the high voltage of the welding. You could fry the generator or the voltage regulator. In the case of this car, the voltage regulator already was fried and I replaced it, but you will see it later. Normally, let's say I do it that way, I mark the area where I cut, so at least I get a straight cut to make it easier afterwards to make a panel for it. Because if you just cut it without, it's just hard to make a panel afterwards. Always wear goggles when you cut something. It's not so good to go to the doctor with a little bit of metal in the eye. And also, before you set the first cut, make sure behind the panel is no wiring loom. In the case of the 60, I know there is no wiring loom, but from some bad experience with a 100, always look inside.
Yeah, please don't paper.
So to clarify, I don't put the stone in there. I assume the super duper good guy who made it before put some stone as weight in it to get the glue sticking. And some concrete. It's masterful. It's a piece of art. Actually, this car was repainted 3 years ago and the owner paid a lot of money for it. But it seems they didn't use much sheet metal. Most of it is Bondo and sealant. Yeah! A solid layer of 2 sheet metals and probably 3 millimeters of Bondo. Professional. The problem now is I have to weld this. I made the first sheet metal piece for the inner layer. I used the old one, making it more or less the right size. I mean, it is a little bit off, and also this one is straight, and when you look at the original Toyota inner layer, it does have a shape, but we go without it. It is a repair, not a restoration. It should be time and cost effective. So we weld this one on. Afterwards I cut this part from behind out, and then we lay the outer layer over it and weld it too. When doing this type of repairs, especially rust repairs, you should cut out as much as possible of the corroded or rusted metal. I mean, to a point when you do a repair, not a restoration. If you do a restoration, I would remove the whole sidewall and get everything right, but like I said, cost effective, time effective. So if you weld it, don't weld it too hot and don't make just 3 spots. It should hold, it should last for some years and is just a little bit more of gas and wire. As you see, I have finished the inner layer of the sheet metal. I welded in 2 pieces. I welded them through. Afterwards I grinded it down so it looks kinda nice. And now I will apply some rust primer, let it dry, and then I will do the outer layer of it. And it should be okay for several years. So I wouldn't expect that it was so much garbage work, but the entire car is a little bit bubbled and have some cracks. So I assume the guy who redid it, or the company who redid it, used mainly Bondo. That will be not nice to hear for the owner, but it is what it is. So as you see, I shaped out a form on the pipe, and the next thing is I will bend it down that we get this part out where it is attached to the inner panel, and afterwards we will put this panel on, mark it down, cut everything away what is too much, and then start to weld it in. I made a replacement panel. It's the old one. It has more or less the same shape, and it does fit very well. Next thing we will do, we will apply some primer on this side and this side, let it dry, and afterwards I will weld it in. And more or less that's it in terms of welding. Afterwards is just Bondo work to straighten it out a little bit. I mean, I cannot change how it is. There is already what I see a lot of Bondo on it. So we will apply some Bondo and then seal it and paint it. That's it. So when I put this panel on, I will attach it with some vice grips, then weld it first on in the bottom, and then I will more or less weld out the shape and bend the panel in so it does fit good on the body, and I don't have to do a lot of Bondo work. And you always, when you weld in a body panel on a straight part like this, I mean on this car, it will be not so important, but you should always take care that you don't apply too much heat, because the panel will wrap. When you just make spot, 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 it will be way too hot. It's just make a spot, make a spot, make a spot. Just slow and steady, and afterwards you don't have the problems with the heat. Also a problem when you make a repair and not a restoration. When I apply too much heat, the Bondo up here will just push away from the car, and that is nothing what should happen. I don't want to Bondo the entire thing because I don't even want to know what is underneath it. I primered both the replacement panel and the rear sheet metal where this thing is attached to. It was sitting for some time, so the primer now is dry. And you should never weld in sheet metal without applying paint to it. I mean, I saw this from experience often that someone welded a car and actually it was just on one side bare. Most of the side was facing to the inner, and it tends to rust very fast then. So you should apply always some rust primer, then weld it. I mean, some of the rust primer will burn off. That doesn't matter because afterwards you did the Bondo and painted it and so on and so on. You put in some grease. Or it is not grease actually, we call it on German Hohlraumkonservierung. What that means is you put in wax or something so it doesn't rust, and it gets, as long as it is thin, it gets in between the sheet metal layers so it doesn't rust, and that's my advice for you. But don't get confused, this side face to the inner side of the car, so you will never see the red paint again. And this side is the outer side. I will paint it after I welded it, and then when the paint is dry I will apply some Bondo, and then we will progress. Actually there is quite a little bit of Bondo on it, but there is nothing I can do about it. So I will fit the panel now with some vice grips and start to weld it. Fits quite nicely actually for a self-made panel. I welded the panel now in. I will grind it down, and afterwards we will apply some rust primer. Before I apply the primer, I will put some tape on so I don't spray everything, because actually I just want to paint probably up to here somewhere. That is where I will stop, and then polishing. I will polish it just that it looks nice, but actually it is not necessary. Primer, tape, primer, let the primer dry. Afterwards put on some Bondo, let the primer dry. If it is like here in Austria, we are nearly in winter, it only has 10 degrees. I let it normally sit for like 5, 6, 7 hours before I apply Bondo, or even better overnight, so 12 to 14 hours. So it is really dry and I can apply some Bondo without the Bondo is coming off. It's actually a problem when it is so cold, and also the air is very wet. So yeah, I let it sit overnight and that's it. And then also between the Bondo layers, but I will say some words to how to do Bondo work afterwards, but now tape it, primer it. That's it for today. For me, for you it will be just a cut, but welcome to day 2 of our 61 welding operation on this beautiful Austrian day, rainy and cold. Now we turn on some lights. Choop. Time for some heat. And now we will start our Bondo operation. Yeah, paint looks dry. Now we can begin with it. So I painted it yesterday before I left. It dried for probably 10 hours or so. Looks good. Before applying the Bondo, I will take some Scotch-Brite and do a little bit... Was it schleifen?
Grinding.
So. Na, schleifen ist nicht grinding.
Das sind auch schon ein bisschen.
Sanding. Nochmal. Before I start the Bondo work, I will take some 320 sandpaper and will sand it a little bit. Afterwards I start it. It will take some time because the weather is pretty cold. And I have to apply the Bondo, let's say, a little bit thicker. That will take some time to dry between the layers. But now, let us start. There we have now the Bondo and a piece of cardboard. I will put some Bondo on the cardboard and put some hardener in it, mix it, and then we will apply it. We will put some more hardener in it today because it is cold and rainy out there, and it should dry at some point. If there is hardener in it, I'll have to take another one. So we have here a chunk of Bondo. Here we have the hardener. Put a good bit on it. Normally, if you have a red hardener, it's easier to see, but it is a white one. We mix it. As I said, if you have a red one, it's easier to see when it is mixed. With some experience, it does also work really good with the white one. So let's apply it. At least the first layer of it. And I see I will need a lot of it. First thing we do, we get it roughly in shape. Afterwards we will grind it down a little bit with some 120 grit paper, and we see how much we need for the next layer. It shouldn't be like that, but as I said before on this car, they applied so much Bondo to it and it is so crooked already. In my experience, most of the older cars, especially here, I mean, probably if someone is watching from Norway or the northern part of the USA, Rust Belt, New York area or something, we can sing a song about it. Now we will let it sit for probably 25 minutes in these weather conditions, and afterwards we will sandpaper it down with a 120, as I said. Now half an hour later it is dry, and now we'll take some 120 grit paper and sand it down roughly, and then apply the second layer of Bondo. So now I grinded it down and I will now apply the second layer of Bondo, and then it should be already pretty straight. I finished the Bondo work on the rear quarter panel. I did it 3 times until it was smooth. I actually did. That's my brother changing the belts between time. I actually did the fender tip and the wheel arch too. I mean, they were not rusty actually. The guy just hit some objects in this city, and afterwards I will apply some primer to it when it is dried, and then on the rear quarter panel we will put on some stone chip, and then we will paint it probably tomorrow when everything is dried. I finished sandpapering it, and now I applied some rock chipping, the rear fender also as well as on the front fender, and now I will let it sit for several hours so it dries before I apply some filler, and afterwards we paint it. But now it is important that everything is dry before I put on the paint, so everything lasts at least some time. I mean, it will get some rust spots on other parts of the car, so probably you know what I mean. Everybody owns a 4x4, at least who does watch this. I did apply the rock chipping because there was already some on it and overpainted, so it does match the other side to some degree. And yeah, I mean, nothing is straight anymore on this rear panel on this car because they already messed it up more or less. So it is a repair, so you can pass the government inspection, and for this it is good enough, and it will probably last 2, 3, 4 years. The car is 45 or so, so it doesn't matter so much anymore. So next thing you will see is paint preparations. After we let the rock chipping dry and we put some plastic on it so it doesn't get full of dust and paint, we will use some silicone remover to get all the grease off, and also some remains of grinding and sandpapering it, so the dust, so the paint, or in this case not the paint, first the filler does stick to everything underneath. Now I will steer some filler, so everything is mixed again, and then we will mix it in a ratio of 4:1 with hardener and 10% thinner, and then we will apply it onto the sheet metal. While the anti-grease is drying, we use the time to be productive. Oh, that looked good. Looked good. Looks good. Looks good. Da 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 da. No 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 no. Put some hardener in it. And afterwards we put some thinner in it. And it is important that the products are matching from the same company, so nothing goes wrong. Afterwards I use my good paint screwdriver to mix that. I mix it until it is smooth. It is one thing actually. When you start to put it in there, it is a little bit like honey, and then afterwards it is more like a fluid. Now it is mixed, and we fill it into the pistol and remove the breather because it's already... I mean, look at my paint pistol, they painted actually a lot. My paint pistol is 10 years old. So now we apply the filler. We make probably 2 or 3 layers. We will see how good it does cover, and we will wait a little bit between the layers so it is sticky dry. After the filler dried, we removed the plastic covering. We sprayed the filler. The last thing we did was applying some red color to it, so we know afterwards, now when it is dry and we smooth it down, we know when we see red spots that we have to grind it down a little more until it is smooth, and then we will paint him. So the next thing you will see is me a little bit of sanding. So after we wet sanded it and smoothed everything down to a certain level, so I don't see any red spots besides down there on where I sprayed the anti-gravel, we will start to paint it. But before, we cleaned it with anti-silicone, let it dry off, and you see we covered the whole car in plastic because air paint it is everywhere in the air then, and then you have it on the windows, on the roof, everywhere. You don't see it first, but afterwards, first time you hit the windscreen wipers, you see there is a lot of paint on it. So the next thing I do now is paint the rear quarter panel. I will paint it in 2 layers. First one, then it will dry, and the second one. This was my DIY. This time I got it. How to change a rear quarter panel, in this case on a landcruiser, but actually it's the same. It's welding, grinding, sandpapering, Bondo Work, filler, and all the other funny stuff. Now we are finished. I uncovered it. It looks pretty nice actually for what the car is. I mean, we talk about a 40-plus-year-old car. And it is not a restoration, it is a repair. But now we would, after the paint is dried, what it is dried, it is touching dry. It's set for 12 hour-ish something. Actually, with room temperature, it would have to sit probably 2 to 3 days to be able to polish it. I will later polish it, probably tomorrow, when it is really hard, so I get this edge away, the painting edge. And yeah, I think that's it. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something, or it was advice for you. We will see us the next time. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow us on social media, subscribe us, and we'll see us the next time.